Hello there, everybody. This is Hal Blumkin on the Comfortably Zone Radio Network. I'm here with my co-host David Nemec and our constant guest Ian Kahanowitz on David Nemec's old-time baseball history and trivia. Due to circumstances, we missed the last couple of weeks, so we're very glad to be back. Welcome, gentlemen.
Welcome to both of you. Good to be with you again.
Today we're going to be discussing, since the events of these coming years are pretty Becca Yogiism, pretty eventful. We're going to start chopping it into small blocks than we've done in the past. Today we're going to discuss 1952 through 1954, and next time we'll do 1955 through 1957, which, of course, 1957 is the last year the Giants were in New York and the Dodgers were in Brooklyn. So, but 52, 53, and 54 have a lot of history to them, so let's get started. We left off in 1951 with the 1951 World Series when the Yankees, under Casey Stengel, had won their third straight. And as our listening audience should know, 1951 was the year of the Giants' miracle comeback and Bobby Thompson's home run. So 1952 came, and they had quite a few changes in the playing personnel. Bobby Doerr and Joe DiMaggio retired. Don Newcomb went into the Army. Willie Mays was about to go into the Army. And two ancient rookies came into the National League by the name of Joe Black and Hoyt Wilhelm. And in May, both Ted Williams and Jerry Coleman were called up from the Marine Reserves to go become fighter pilots in Korea and would be there till basically to the end of that war in July 1953. Ted Williams was not thrilled by that. So, but in 1952, you had two really good pennant races. Also, one thing you should, one of you guys can collaborate this. 1952 was probably the worst hitting year of the 1950s. Basically, the same cast of characters that were hitting close to 300 in 1950 were hitting 270 in 1952. And consequently, you had quite a number of pitchers had their career year in the earned run average in 1952. Anybody?
Well, we can point out one thing. We talked about this the last time we were together, that walk totals went through the roof in the late 40s and early 50s, and in 52 there was a sharp drop in walks in both leagues, particularly in the American League. I think that had some bearing here on what happened with the hitters. We're still not clear on why there was a sharp drop in walks, but there was, and it was significant, I think.
Because 1953 would turn to be a much better year for hitters than 1952 did. And, it's funny, in the National League, the top two teams were the Dodgers and the Giants. And the Giants, I think a case can be made that DeRocher did a good job in 1952 in managing the Giants as he did in 1951 because they lost Willie Mays to the Army in May. And in spring training, their top RBI man, Monty Irvin, broke his ankle and was out of the lineup until August. So it was very, very patchwork. And,
that was a very significant injury. I remember it well.
They finished only 4.5 games behind the Dodgers at the end. And the Dodgers lost Newcomb to the Army, which was he was a 20-game winner in 1951. And they got the rookie Joe Black, who had his one and only sensational season. He was a relief pitcher. He wound up being named Rookie of the Year over Lloyd Wilhelm. He was 15-4 and wound up starting 3 games in the World Series. And he helped propel the Dodgers to win the pennant because most of the Dodger hitters, with the exception of Jackie Robinson, had weak seasons. Hodges and Ferrillo especially. Ferrillo at 247, and they found out that he had a lot of dirt in his eyes after the season, and they operated on his eyes, and they removed it, and he would go on to lead the league in hitting in 1953. The Giants had their own rookie, the knuckleball Hoyt Wilhelm, who came up at the age of 30 and went 15-3 and led the National League in ERA. He had enough innings to qualify for it. And he picked up the slack that was essentially left by Larry Jansen and Jim Hearn, who fell off considerably from the 1951 performances. The American League was another story. Oh, by the way, in the National League, can't go without mentioning the 1952 Pittsburgh Pirates. Won 42 and lost 112. Ralph Kiner has last home run crown for that team. He had 37. And Joe Garagiola, who made a lifetime act about talking about that team, was on the team the whole year. They won 42 games. Murray Dixon, right-handed pitcher, won 14 of them. He was 14-21. And they would bring up guys from Class D. Dick Groth was a rookie who came to the team after he graduated from Duke in June of that year. And he told me years and years ago that we had 3 teams, one playing, one coming, and one going. And that team was, voted by a number of people as the worst team of the 1950s.
Yeah, I think they were.
And somehow they beat the Dodgers 3 times. And Dick Groth told me, he says, we were like high school kids playing against them. We were amazed we even won 1.
Let me ask you this.
You also in the National League, you had pitchers like household names like Kenny Raffensperger, Bob Rush. Bob Rush won 17 games that season for the Cubs. That's the most any pitcher won for the Cubs in a season in the 1950s. And they had 2 other guys, Paul Minner and Warren Hacker, who had career years and career low ERAs. They were all under 3 at that point.
Yeah.
Hank Sauer, who with the tied for leading home runs and led the league in RBIs and hit 270 for the 5th place Cubs, was named the most valuable player over Robin Roberts, who won 28 games for the 4th place Phillies.
Yeah, that was a really bizarre choice, all considered.
The guy, Jeremy Lerman, who wrote the book on MVPs that came out last year, said that this was probably one of the most unjust MVP votings in its history.
Yeah, it made no sense at all.
And it was the Cubs tied for 5th, and the Phillies came in 4th. And the Cardinals came in 3rd, and outside of Stan Musial and Red Cheney's Sloy, they didn't really have much.
No, they had a little bit of pitching, but not enough. But Speaking of pitching, we really need to say more about the Dodgers staff, I think. Yeah. After they lost Newcomb, Joe Black led the club in wins, and mostly in relief, although he did start 2 games during the regular season before he was pressed into service as a starter in a World Series. But the rest of the pitching staff, except for Carl Erskine, who turned out to be a major contributor for the Dodgers for a number of years, really wallowed in obscurity. I would almost defy anyone to name the 6 starters for the Dodgers in 1952 who started 10 or more games. They really had to dig deep to come up with, except for Preacher Rowe, who had been a very good pitcher earlier on. You have Billy Lowe's, Ben Wade, Chris Van Kyke, and Johnny Rutherford.
Yeah.
And these guys are far from household names, even in Brooklyn history. And that was basically their starting staff. I mean, they really had to cobble together a staff, and they nevertheless managed to win 96 games with 5 pitchers who won in double figures, led by Black with 15. But nobody really, except for Erskine, who ever did anything much after that for the Dodgers.
Well, Billy Lowe's was famous for saying, I think, he said he never wanted to win 20, and he only wanted to win 14 games, because if he won 20, they would expect him to do it every year. And I believe that was also the year that he picked the Yankees to win the World Series over the Dodgers, and then claimed he was misquoted. He said 7 games, not 6. He was playing with quite a few loose screws.
Yeah.
And over the American League, you had an incredible race between the Yankees and the Indians. The rest of the White Sox finished a good third, but the rest of them fell off. And that was also the first year that the Detroit Tigers would finish in last place in their history. The Yankees, I've done some research on this season. The Yankees and the Indians went into September 2 games apart. They finished the season 2 games apart. Both teams went 19-5 in September.
Yeah, I remember that. Indians just kept around.
Yeah, they only played each other once. It was a quirk in the schedule, and the Yankees won that game. And
that was.
And Feller has his worst season then. He was 9-13, and the wheels started to fall off. But Garcia, Lemon, and Wynn all won 20 games. And Al Lopez, in the last few weeks of the season, said he was going to pitch them until their arms fall off. So they asked Casey Stengel about that, and he said, I heard it could be done, but sometimes it don't always work.
Yeah.
And the Yankees were winning. Allie Reynolds had his best season. Whitey Ford was still in the Army. Allie Reynolds was 20-8 and led the American League in ERA. But Rashi had fallen off to 16-6, and Lopat missed several months in the season with arm trouble and wound up 10-5. They got wins out of Johnny Saint, who pitched very well for them that season. And they got wins out of such pitchers as Bill Biller, Ray Scarborough, Joe Ostrowski, guys.
Jim McDonald.
Yeah, Joe McDonald. Jim McDonald. Some of these guys you wouldn't know from unless you see them on the.
And he also picked up Bobby Hogue, who had been a member of the 48 Braves. It was his last gasp, I think, in Major League garb. And
they picked him up in 51. It became very useful for 4 seasons. But there was a hodgepodge staff, but Stengel knew how to manipulate. Okay, and that was the year Mickey Mantle became a regular. He missed time at the beginning of the season because of the knee injury he suffered in the 1951 World Series hadn't completely healed. And Mantle became the center fielder. They used Gene Woodley in left field mainly, and Bauer at right field. They had gotten Irv Noren for Jackie Jensen from Washington in May of that year. They sent Jackie Jensen and Spec Shea over to Washington. And Noren was a useful outfielder for several years. The other position changes they made were At second base, Jerry Coleman was called up by the Marines, and Billy Martin took over full time. And Gil McDougald, who had come up in 1951, was the regular third baseman in 1952. And they managed to win enough to beat the Indians out by 2 games. The Indians had, I think, Rosen and Doby tied for the AL lead in RBIs with 105 that season. Luke Easter hit 30 home runs. Dale
had
at 323 and was second to Ferris Fane, who won a second straight batting title for the Philadelphia A's. And so they had a pretty good offensive team, and the Yankees just found a way to win 2 more games than they did.
Yeah, it was. I think that year probably more than any other established Casey Stengel as really a good manager.
Yeah, fourth straight. That to me, I think that was the key to their 5 because not only that, but the way they won the World Series, which we'll get into in a few minutes. The American League MVP was Bobby Shantz, pitcher for the Philadelphia A's, who was 24-7 for a team that won that finished in 4th place, and he got the MVP of the American League. They didn't turn him down like they turned down the National League voters turned down his contemporary Robert Roberts over in the others, from the same ballpark.
Yeah, that was incredible.
And the Red Sox finally, after they started breaking up the team from the late 40s and 1950, and all of them were either Williams was in the service. All of them were the others were either traded or retired, like Bobby Dorr, or in their last season, like Dominic DiMaggio. So they did a whole wholesale cleaning of their roster and brought in a lot of players that would stick with them through most of the 50s, but the hard-hitting teams that they had all those years prior to that were no longer. And we shouldn't get out of the 1950s before the World Series, without mentioning the Boston Braves. Braves were in their last year in Boston. Warren Spahn was 14-19 with an ERA of under 3. Eddie Matthews was a rookie. Johnny Logan was second year, and the other 2 players who survived that team to in Milwaukee to be with them, the Braves in 1953, were Johnny Antonelli and Del Crandall, both of them missed 1951 and 1952 because of military. Of course, the Giants acquired Antonelli from them after 53 for Bobby Thompson. The Braves in 1952 drew 281,000 for the year in attendance. They had been playing second fiddle to the Red Sox for almost forever. But that year they really, really fell apart. And we'll get into the move of the Braves to Milwaukee after we discuss the World Series. Ian, have you ever done any research on the 52 World Series?
I have. And one of the people who I speak to is Gil Hodges' daughter, Irene. And that was and Irene lives near Yale. She lives a few blocks away. And she always tells me, she was 2 years old at the time, but that, her father always said, hey, that was his worst World Series he's ever had to deal with because he didn't get a hit in the whole World Series. And he took the blame pretty much on himself for it. It was just disheartening to see, because he was really emerging at that time. And, it was just one of those things where, he even asked the priest to pray for him. But, That's some of the stuff I did. I know it went to Game 7, and you had a nice push and pull, even though Hodges wasn't hitting. A lot of the games were, the Yankees blew out the Dodgers in one of them. The Dodgers beat them by one in another. They were pretty close games, like 2-0, 6-5, 3-2. I mean, it was pretty much an evenly matched series when you look at it.
The 11th, the Game 5 of the 11th inning game was on the weekend. I remember because that's the first game that I ever watched on TV in its entirety. Joe Black beat started the first game of the World Series and beat Ali Reynolds 4-2. The Yankees won the second game behind Vic Raschi. The Dodgers won the third game to go up 2-1. They beat Lopat. Reynolds shut the Dodgers out. They beat Joe Black 2-0 in Game 4. Then we come to Game 5. The Yankees started Ewell Blackwell, who they had picked up from the Reds on waivers late in the 52 season because they really didn't have anybody else at that point. And Blackwell got knocked out. The Yankees scored 5 runs off of
Erskine
in the 5th inning, and Dressen left Erskine in, and the game went to extra innings, tied 5-5. Okay. In the bottom of the 10th, there was a play. Johnny Sain had hit a ground ball, and he's on first base, and the ball is 10 feet away from Gil Hodges. The umpire, Art Passarella, called Sain out. You can see pictures of this. There's plenty of pictures published of this after that game, and you can see Sain with his foot on first base, the ball nowhere near Hodges. I think Passarella was let go after that season. Or if it wasn't that season, it was the next one. I have to check that out. But also, the Dodgers scored a run up in the 11th off Sain, and the Johnny Mize hit a ball in the bottom of the 11th inning that Carl Furillo made a circus catch in front of the right field wall. And the Dodgers won that game 6-5 to take a 3-2 lead, and the series went back to Ebbets Field. In those years, there were no days off. Like they have now. There's no travel days, of course.
Well, I think there were, but not for a Subway series.
Yeah. And the 6th game, the Dodgers started Billy Lowe's against Vic Raschi. The Dodgers went ahead. The Yankees tied up, and Mickey Mantle hit a home run, I think in the 7th inning to decide that. That was also the game where Billy Lowe's lost the ground ball in the sun.
Yeah.
And when he said that after the game, they thought he was crazy, and then they realized that it could happen because the way the sun was angled at that particular time, it was right in the pitcher's eyes. And so it was, a number of years later, they determined that it was very possible for a pitcher to lose the ball in the sun. And Vic Raschi, who was hitting at the time, got a hit. He was a fairly decent hitter for a pitcher, and tied the game up. And Mantle won it in the top of the 7th or 8th innings. Billy Martin in the bottom of the 8th. The Dodgers, the Yankees had used Raschi and both Raschi and Lopat relief of Reynolds in this Game 7. And neither of them were effective. The Yankees had a 4-2 lead going into the bottom of the 7th inning, and the Dodgers had loaded the bases with 1 out. He takes out Lopat and brings in Bob Cazava, who had saved the last game of the 1951 World Series, to face Duke Snider. Cazava was left-handed. Duke Snider had faced Kazava a number of times in the International League when Kazava was pitching there and Duke Snider was playing for Montreal, and Duke didn't hit him at all. So he got Snider. Okay, the next one out is Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson hits a towering pop, and all the Dodgers are running because there's 2 outs. And Joe Collins lost the ball of the sun. Billy Martin comes running in from second base and catches the pop-up.
Pretty much off his shoe top.
Saved the game. Kazava retired the Dodgers in the 8th and 9th without too much trouble, and the Yankees won that game 4-2. And I think because the Yankees came back from in Ebbets Field of all places, where there's supposed to be a tremendous disadvantage, and they came back and won the last 2 games of that World Series.
Yeah, that was a heartbreaker for Brooklyn because they really were sitting right on the verge of winning their first World Championship, and and once again it was wait till next year.
Yeah, so now we got to 1953, and the big story in spring training in 1953 was the move of the Braves from Boston to Milwaukee. And the story goes that Bill Veeck wanted to move the St. Louis Browns, who were in the midst of losing a popularity war with the Cardinals, which they've been doing for years. He wanted to move the Browns to Milwaukee, where he had owned the minor league team in 1944. And the American League voted him down. They wouldn't let him move. The Boston Braves had their AAA franchise in Milwaukee, so they had the rights to the territory. That's the way it went back then. And they decided 2 weeks from the season, before the season started, to move the Braves from Boston to Milwaukee. As I mentioned earlier, the Braves were drawing 281,000 in Milwaukee. In Boston in 1952, and they moved to Milwaukee, and they would go out to draw over 1,800,000 in Milwaukee. And the enthusiasm there was incredible. And the team improved from a 7th place team in 52 to a 2nd place team. They didn't really challenge the Dodgers, who would go on to win 105 games that year. Probably the best Brooklyn Dodgers team that was ever
yeah.
played. The hitters all hit. Erskine would go on to win 20 games. They had gotten Russ Meyer in a trade, four-way trade from the Phillies, and he contributed 15 wins. They brought in rookie Johnny Padres, and Lucan was still in the Army, but what happened with Joe Black was one of the sad stories. Now, I have a book that I picked up last year called Great Negro Baseball Stars. It's chapters. It was published after 1952, and it has chapters on every Negro ball player that was in the major leagues in 1952. I mean, Harry Simpson, Sam Jethro, all these guys, no matter how often or infrequently they played. And the end of the chapter on Joe Black said, Dressen thinks that Joe Black has to learn a new pitch for 1953. And Joe Black's motion was fouled so much spring training that he never, in the remaining 4 years that he stayed in the National League, never was able to recover his the kind of effectiveness they had in 1952. They won fairly easily. The Giants had fallen down to 5th place and basically were a losing team. Sal Madley came down with back problems. Willie Mays was still in the Army. And in fact, DeRocher, as he tended to do, lost interest when the team fell out of contention fairly early. And the other 20-game winners besides Erskine were perennials Robert Roberts and Warren Spahn, and a rookie on the Cardinals named Harvey Haddix. Carl Furillo won the batting title, and Eddie Matthews would lead the league in home runs with 47 in his second season. And the RBI title was won by Roy Campanella, who had his best season and drove in 142 runs for the Dodgers. Yeah, over in the American League, the Yankees had their easiest win of the 5 straight pennants. They won 99 games. They had 3 games that were unplayed. They wound up 99-52, and they wound up finishing 8.5 games ahead of the Indians. They had an 18-game winning streak during that season, and their hitters all did pretty well. The pitchers started to slow down. Eddie Lopat was 16-4, won the ERA crown. Whitey Ford came back from the Army, went 18-6. Rashi fell off to 13-6 in his last season with the Yankees. And Allie Reynolds was turned into a relief pitcher for the most part, and became one of the few pitchers to have won an ERA crown. Pitched the whole season after that and did not have enough innings to qualify for the ERA title.
Yeah.
The Indians had Al Rosen, who had a year for the ages.
Yeah, probably maybe the most remarkable year, except for maybe George Brett, ever by an American League third baseman. He came within a step of beating out a ground ball in his last at bat of the season that would have brought him the batting title, along with the home run crown and the RBI crown. Yeah, and he was playing the Washington Senators, and he was thrown out at first base, and the first baseman for the Senators was Mickey Vernon, who did win the batting title. Vernon hit 300 twice in his career in full season play, and both times won the batting title, 1946 and 1953.
Yeah, I did a profile on Al Rosen on one of the Facebook sites. I think it was last week. I looked up his 53 season on reference. He also led the league in runs, slugging, total bases, and on-base percentage, and OPS.
And RBIs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Home runs and RBIs.
He was sitting on the cusp of a Hall of Fame career at the end of 1953, but 54, we'll get into it in a few minutes, but he suffered a finger injury and never really came back. Never could really hold the bat right after that.
Yeah, one of the 20-game winners that season was a pitcher on Washington named Bob Porterfield, who was never that good before or after. He came basically out of the woodwork for that season and went back in the following year. Mel Parnell won 21 games for the Red Sox. He had beat the Yankees 5 times that season. He was hit on the wrist by a pitch ball right at the end of the season, and really he never was the same after that. Bobby Shantz, who had won the MVP the year before for the Philadelphia A's, who won 24 games, fell off to 5-8. He was also hit by a pitch at the end of 1952 and came down with a sore arm and never really recovered from that, although he became, later on, he became a very valuable pitcher for the Yankees as a spot starter and reliever. And the hitting generally perked up after in 1953, after the low point in 1952. Carl Furillo hit 344 to win the National League batting title, and the second finisher was Red Schoendienst, the Cardinals second baseman with a career .342. And they would go into the World Series again for the fourth time since 1947 to be the Yankees and Dodgers again. I should mention that Ted Williams came out of the service in July of 1953 and suited up for the Red Sox, and he didn't lose a thing. He hit over 491 at-bats that he had that year and hit 13 home runs. He's hitting a home run every 7 at-bats in the limited playing time he saw that year. And he would get some help in the off-season, so he wasn't the only offensive force that the Red Sox had. In the 1953 series, the Yankees again would beat the Dodgers 4-2. And the first game, which I remember watching on TV, was 5 up in the 6th inning, and the Dodgers got runners on first and second with nobody out. And Charlie Dressen, the Dodger manager, called for 2 consecutive sacrifice bunts. And Berra threw both runners out at third base.
Oh, boy.
Broke their back in that game, and the Yankees went on to win 9-5. They won the second game, and Eddie Lopez finally beat the Dodgers in the World Series game. The Dodgers took the next 2. The fourth game ended. The Yankees were trying to start a rally. They were losing 7-3. Billy Martin rounded third and had a collision at home plate with Roy Campanella. And you've seen pictures of this. You've seen Martin got totally off his feet and flying in all sorts of directions. And he was tagged out. The fifth game was a wild game. The Yankees started Jim McDonald, who David referenced a few minutes ago. Again, they were short on starting pitchers. And the Dodgers started Johnny Padres. The Yankees hit Padres, and in the third inning, Mickey Mantle came up with the bases loaded. They brought in Russ Meyer. The first pitch Russ Meyer threw, Mickey Mantle hit onto Bedford Avenue and gave the Yankees a 4-run lead. They wound up winning that game 11-7. And what turned out to be the last game, the Yankees started Whitey Ford. And they had a 3-1 lead after the 8th inning. And a move that was, that would be done now, Ford was pulled out after the 8th inning. The game was being played at Yankee Stadium. They sent in Allie Reynolds to relieve. Reynolds gave up a 2-run home run in the top of the 9th. To call Ferrello. The Dodgers tied the game up, and the Yankees got 3 straight singles. The last one by Billy Barton off Quan Labine, and they won the game in the bottom of the 9th, 4-3 for their 5th straight World Series. Billy Martin was one of those players who was mediocre during the regular season, but in the World Series he managed to turn it up several notches. And that series, he hit 500, 12 for 24, drove in a whole bunch of runs, and knocked in the winning run in the final game. He was the MVP of the World Series. And so for the 5th time the Yankees would win the World Series, it was something that has never been replicated. And the way things are organized today, with the multi-levels of playoffs, this is something that'll probably never happen again. Do you guys have an opinion on that?
I think you're absolutely right. I think there's no chance it's ever going to happen again. It's a feat just to win the pennant one year. because as Al mentioned, the playoffs now are a really torturous climb, just to even get into the league championship series. And by the time you're out of that, then having to win the World Series on top of it, a lot of teams are, they're pretty spent just from making it to the World Series round.
Well, the closest thing you have to a dynasty in the National League in this decade is the Giants, and they won 3 in every other year.
And which I think was a fantastic feat.
Yeah. But to do this on when the Yankees won 4 straight pennants and 3 World Series from 1998 through 2001, and something that probably, with the way it's structured now, will never come close to happening again. Ian, you have any comment on this?
Well, it's almost like reversed. Back in '53, you still had to win a division with all those teams in it. So although there wasn't no playoffs like we have now, you still had to win the division. And think of all the teams that didn't win the division, no wild cards and stuff like that. So now, you bring the championship series in '69. Now other teams have a chance. But then you change the whole damn system around in '95. And now with the extra game, with the wild card, it's going to be wild card. It's like leapfrogging. And I think both of you hit on a few points. One, you're going to be spent trying to win the championship and the division series. And then you're like, if your team's not rested going into the World Series, it's hard to win 2 championships in a row, nevertheless one.
Then you got, so after that you got to 1954, and the Daily News writer Bill Madden came out with a book on that season 2 years ago, which was very, very interesting. The National League, the Giants would wind up winning the pennant. Willie Mays came out of the Army. That was also the rookie year for 2 guys you may have heard of, Henry Aaron and Ernie Banks. And it was a pretty crazy year in both leagues. The Giants got Willie Mays back from the Army. They had traded Bobby Thompson to the Braves, essentially for Johnny Antonelli, who would go on to win 21 games and to lead the National League of the ERA, and would have won the Cy Young Award that year had there been one. They beat the Dodgers out by, I believe it was 5 games. The Dodgers, Don Newcomb had come back from the Army and was 9-8. He had a very, very mediocre season. Newcomb was very bitter about having to go into the Army for the 2 years at the peak of his career. And Roy Campanella, who had had a monster year in 1953, came down with a severe hand injury, and he wound up hitting .207 for the year. And the Giants were able to beat them out. And the Braves had fallen off to 3rd place, and and it was the Phillies were 4th. The Cardinals, who were a staple contender for quite a number of years, dipped all the way to 6th place, even though Musial and Chavis were still having big years. Cincinnati had Ted Kluszewski, who was coming to his own power-wise in 1953, and Ted Kluszewski hit 49 home runs and drove in 141 runs and led the National League in both categories that season. He was a monster until his back problems caught up with him in 1957. He basically became a part-timer in that season. The American League was really wild. The Indians finally beat the Yankees. The Yankees, George Weiss had stonewalled the Yankees in contracts because they were all, a number of them were holding out 5 straight World Series champions. He decided to make an example of Vic Raschi. he sold Vic Raschi to the Cardinals in March of 1954. And I was 10 years old, and I remember when I heard that on the radio, I was up half the night crying. I go, how could they do that? I didn't know they could trade guys like that. And that the Yankees would go on to win 103 games. They had a rookie pitcher, Bob Grimm, who won 20 games, 8 of which were at relief. And it was the most wins by any team during the Stengel era. They also brought in a rookie named Bill Skowron, who essentially took over for Johnny Mize, who retired at the end of 1953, to platoon at first base with Joe Collins. Billy Martin was taken into the Army, and the Yankees had problems at second base until they moved Gil McDougall from third base to second, and they put Andy Carey at third base, who would hit 300 for the only time in his career then. Phil Rizzuto fell off to 195, and he was basically replaced at shortstop that season by Willie Miranda, who was the ultimate good field no-hit. He was a Cuban who they had gotten in a trade. And Gene Woodling had a very bad year, and Irv Noren was put into left field, or Irv Noren would hit 319, finished second in the batting race. And because of that, the Yankees would acquire Bob Turley and Don Lawson from the Orioles after the season. They put Gene Woodling in the trade, and Irv Noren, they kept Irv Noren would go back to hitting 260 after that, and Woodling would have several good seasons with the Orioles and the Indians afterwards. The Indians went on to win 111 games for an American League record.
Yeah, as far as winning percentage, it's no longer the record for wins, but it's still the highest winning percentage.
And the Yankees were 114 and 48 in 1998. But they had the starting pitchers, Bob Lemon and Early Wood, each won 23. Mike Garcia was 19 and 8 and led the league at ERA. Bob Fellow bounced back to 13 and 3. They had
Art Houdeman had a good year.
They had gotten from Detroit the previous season.
2 rookie relievers, Ray Narleski and Don Mossy, were contributors. The pitching staff was very deep and very solid. The hitters, Bobby Avila won the batting title, the Cleveland second baseman, and is still the last Cleveland Indian to win a batting title. He stands there still today, well over 60 years later, and they're still looking for another batting title. Rosen hit 300, despite suffering a finger injury, but was not the same hitter at all. His power numbers decreased severely, and the rest of the lineup, Adobe had a fairly good year. Al Smith, the rookie, had a fairly good year. He had 3 regulars get below 240. Jim Hegan, the catcher, George Strickland, the shortstop, and Dave Philly, the right fielder, all were down in the 230s and 220s. And it was not a deep hitting team by any means.
Adobe won home runs and RBIs, and they made a very good deal when they shipped a nondescript pitcher named Bob Chackles to the Orioles.
For Vic Wirtz, that was a very good deal.
Yeah, the Browns in 1953 had wound up 54 and 100, and Bill Veeck was desperate to move them. And after a lot of shenanigans that went on there, they would allow the American League owners, who, led by Topping and Webb of the Yankees, hated Veeck's guts, decided to let the team move to Baltimore as long as Veeck sold the team. That's what happened. Veeck had to get out of that because it was a losing proposition, and he sold the team to a group in Baltimore who was approved of the American League and the St. Louis Browns in 1953 became the Baltimore Orioles in 1954. Also in the American League, the White Sox had won 94 games and lost 68, 69, whatever it was. I think they had one game rained out. They finished 25 games ahead of the fourth place Boston Red Sox, who won 69 games. And two of the teams in the American League were the Orioles, who won 53, and the last year the Philadelphia A's, who won 50. And the Indians split their 22 games with the Yankees. They split their 22 games with the White Sox and beat the living daylights out of the bottom five. I think they beat the Red Sox 20 times that season.
Yeah. Yeah, they really mopped up on the tail enders.
Yeah, I remember the Yankees still fighting. They went to a doubleheader on a Sunday in Cleveland, where I think they set at that time, the regular season record for attendance in a game.
Right.
A regular season game, and the Indians won both games of the doubleheader.
That spelled pretty much the end of the pennant race. But the Yankees hung in there for a long, long time, despite Cleveland's, real charge to win 111 games.
The last game of that season, Stengel had Yogi Berra playing third base, Mickey Mantle playing shortstop, and Bill Skowron playing second base. A meaningless game right at the end of the season there. But that Indians team could, it was just too much that year. And Al Lopez, who managed the team, would be the only one to beat Casey Stengel in the 12 years that Stengel managed the Yankees. He would do it again with the 59 White Sox. And it was a pretty good, it turned out to be a pretty interesting season. In 1954, we'll get to the World Series between the Indians and the Giants. And David, I'll let you take over on that because you're still probably paying from that one, right?
Yeah, well, I remember it well. Indians were heavily favored, of course, and the opening two games were played in the Polo Grounds. And in the opening game, late in the game, the score was tied, I believe, and Vic Wertz hit probably one of the hardest balls ever hit in World Series play, a line shot to deep center field in the Polo Grounds, deepest part of the park. Willie Mays tracked it down and made a miraculous catch. But even more miraculous than his catch was his wheeling around and throwing to hold Larry Doby, keep Larry Doby from tagging up, keeping him on second base. And Doby represented a potential winning run and never came around to score. And a guy named Dusty Rhodes, an immortal name in Cleveland history and one that very, very few Clevelanders even today aren't aware of, hit a cheap home run and to win the into the seats, in the right field seats, and extra innings to win the first game. He dumped another one in there to win the second game, and the Giants went back to Cleveland up 2-0. And Cleveland fans were stunned. The team was stunned. Lopez, I don't think, did a terrific job of managing in the series at all. Game 3 was there, potentially to win, and they lost it. And Game 4, everybody was, the team down 3-0 at that point, and never rallied to win the World Series. So everyone assumed that the Indians were now going down to defeat, and wanted to see Bob Feller start the final game. That would be probably his last important game in a Cleveland uniform. And they were really trumpeting for him to start. And instead, Lopez went with the regular rotation. And game 4 was lost pretty quickly. I remember Wally Westlake made a very egregious error in right field, letting in 2 runs, I think, late in the game, and that was pretty much it. Cleveland fans went home at the end of that game, Game 4. they never again saw a World Series game in Cleveland Municipal Stadium. And those who were lucky enough to see the first one 6 years earlier, myself included, in the space of 6 years, at that 6-year bookend, those were all the World Series games ever played in Cleveland Stadium. 1948, 3 games. 1954, 2 games. So a total of 5 games in all the years Cleveland Municipal Stadium was around, prior to the new stadium being built in 1994.
Yeah, there were a couple of sidebars on that series. In the first game, most people believe that the game, Cleveland would have won that game if it had been played anywhere else besides the Polo Grounds.
Yeah.
And Dodd Little, who was a relief pitcher that the Giants had gotten along with Antonelli from the Braves, came in to pitch to Wirtz in that inning, that 8th inning, and he was the pitcher when Wirtz hit the ball to center field. The base made that catch on, and supposedly when Marv Grissom came in to relieve him after that play, Little turned to him and said, "Well, I got my man." Little to his dying day never denied that story. And the other,
no, why would he?
I read Alvin Dark's autobiography a bunch of years ago called "When in Doubt, Fire the Manager." In fact, I got him to sign the book at a card show about 15 years ago. He stated that the Giants and the Indians basically were the only teams at that point that were training in Arizona. And they used to barnstorm east, playing each other all throughout the exhibition season. So they knew each other pretty well. And the Giants, Doc said because of that, the Giants were not intimidated. And they said the Indians had no left-handed starters. And they were slow on the bases, and they were deficient defensively. They said, we had a shot against them.
That's a pretty fair assessment. That is a pretty fair assessment. Doby was a good center fielder. Smith was a rookie. Philly in right field had good days and bad days in the field and terrible at the plate. And Westlake was a sloppy fielder. So they had outfield deficiencies. Strickland was a good shortstop.
Mitchell anymore at all. At that point, they wouldn't use Del Mitchell at all in the outfield. Yeah.
No, he was almost exclusively a pinch hitter in 1954 and was very angry about it, very bitter. Felt that, here I am, I've been a 300 hitter all my career, and now they're dumping me for a rookie. And actually, Wally Westlake replaced him initially at the beginning of the season, but then when Smith came along and took over in left field, and Rosen took over. Rosen started the year at first base and moved back to third when Cleveland acquired Wirtz.
Yeah,
and Bobby Avila was not a great second baseman. So Jim Hegan was a solid catcher, had a good arm, good at handling pitchers, but was not much of a hitter. And as I said, Strickland and Philly both hit well under 240. And, they carried that, but the bottom of their lineup, once you got by the number 5 man, you had Philly, Strickland, and Hegan, and then the pitcher. So you really, good pitchers would work past the top 5. And Cleveland played a lot of close games, a lot of low scoring games, and their pitching held them in there.
Yeah, it was, they also had, I think, one game during the season when the Yankees got a 7-0 lead in the first inning, and the Indians came back and beat them 8-7. And Bobby Avila never came close to having a year like that again. He wound up being one of the 7 second basemen who inadequately tried to replace Red Shadings at the second. When Shadings was out with tuberculosis for 1959 Braves. The MVP in the American League was Yogi Berra. And the reason he got the MVP that year was that the MVP vote was split among the Indian players, among Doby, Avila, and I think it was Bob
Rosa got some votes too.
But they didn't settle on one Indian ball player. Ted Williams hit 345, but didn't win the batting title because at that point it was not play appearances; it was official at bats. And he fell 14 bats short.
By today's rules, by today's standards, would have won the batting title, and Cleveland would have been without a batting titleist in '54 and would have had to go all the way back to 1944 to look for his last batting titleist, Lou Boudreau.
And so that's why Yogi Berra had gotten the MVP. The Yankees would lose Ali Reynolds, who would retire off that season. Phil Rizzuto would be relegated to a very, very utility role because he was essentially through. And the Yankees would be in a state of flux for a little while. One of the players in the American League who had a really great year was Minnie Minoso, who drove in 116 runs and scored 119 runs, and was the main cog of the White Sox offense in that year. The National League had Willie Mays won the MVP, and they had a great batting race. Willie Mays won on the last day of the season with 345, beating out Don Mueller by 3 points, who were 342, and Duke Snider by 4 points, who were 341. And the big event after that season was the move of the Philadelphia A's to Kansas City after the 1954 season. But we'll get into that next week.
It would be the third move in the space of 3 years after half a century of no moves.
Exactly.
Almost half a century. And it
really
started.
Anything before we close this?
Well, it's one of those things where in '52, I think for a trivia, you guys like the trivia, Ted Williams, on Ted Williams' Day, right before he went back to the Marines, hit a home run, which would be ironic because he would end his career with a home run at his last at-bat in 1960. So that was, and Honus Wagner, he retired in '52, I think, when Pittsburgh had that awful season. I don't know if Pittsburgh's awful season contributed to Wagner retired because he was 77 years old, but that's when he
probably could have played shortstop better than 11. They had that. He probably could have made started on that team.
Yeah.
And other than that, Ted Williams was shot. He wasn't shot down, but he was able to land his plane. He got hit while doing some bombing missions in Korea, and then he came back, and like we just mentioned, he didn't have enough at bats to win the title. And the shot that Mays caught 462 feet. Now think of it, 462 feet, dead center, and Mays is able to hold Larry Doby. Today, that shot would be gone in any ballpark.
Yeah, absolutely. It would have been gone in any other ballpark except Polo Grounds at that time too. And in Cleveland Municipal Stadium before the fence went in. The fence went in '47. Prior to that, nobody had ever hit one into the center field bleachers in Cleveland Stadium.
Yeah, one last piece of trivia. The only other ball player I got David on this in San Diego 24 years ago. The only other major league player besides Ted Williams to do service in World War II in Korea was Bob Kennedy, an outfielder with the Cleveland and the sort of other teams who played 41 through 57. Jerry Coleman was not in the major leagues during World War II. That's a statement that most people give. He was not in the major leagues during World War II. And so if you want to really get somebody on that one, there it is out there.
I remember that well, Al.
Yeah,
I remember that well.
So So anyway, we have to close. I want to thank both of you, and hopefully everything will be back to normal next week, and we'll do 1955 through 1957. Thank you both.
Thank
you.
Okay.
Pleasure once again.
Bye-bye.
Same.